Hello everyone, thank you for joining me in this presentation. In this video, I'm going to talk about positioning and power dynamics in small group interactions. This is a research project that I started working on in 2015, and I started by looking at positioning and power dynamics in small group interactions in education settings, but since then, we've been expanding this project and we've been looking at workplace interactions, everyday interactions, and so on. So we are gathering more and more data to see how much our findings from education settings really hold in other different areas. So let's go ahead and start talking about power dynamics, positioning, and first, let's go ahead and talk about what is positioning. So let's start with the definitions. What is positioning? To put it simply, positioning is what role you play in an interaction. And we have two different types of positioning. We have reflexive positioning and we have interactive positioning. Reflexive positioning is on an individual level. So that's basically the role that you assign to yourself in an interaction. And that could have so many different reasons behind it. So the role that you choose for yourself could have so many different reasons behind it. So it could be your personality, life experiences, how comfortable you feel in a specific context, or how comfortable you feel talking about a specific topic, or how much power you perceive you have in relation to the other people in that group. Or this could be related to how much motivation you have in completing that specific task. So the second type of positioning is interactive positioning. And as it is clear from the name, when we talk about interactive positioning, that's when somebody else assigns a position to us. For example, if your friend comes up to you and asks you a question, they have put you in the position of replier because you need to reply to that question. If somebody comes up to you and asks you to explain something, then they've put you in the position of explainer. So have in mind these two types of positioning. We are going to come back to these later on in the presentation. And here's a list of the roles or positions that we identified in small group interactions. So as you can see here, we have really a range of different roles, 24 in total, from advisor to apprentice to challenger, collaborator, companion, seeker, sympathizer, and so on. And we have the indicators, we have the explanation about what each role really comprises of. We also found that these roles or positionings, they could be divided into different categories. We have three main types. We have role positioning, which is the duty or role one takes in a group, or sometimes they are assigned to that role by their interlocutors. We also have task positioning, which is a positioning allocated to one by task. So if the task is asking someone to let's say critique something or to explain something, that is the role that the task is assigning to that person. And then the third type of positioning is power positioning. So these are roles that are associated with more or less power. So the level of power you take as a person who takes part in a conversation in comparison with other interlocutors. So always associated with higher, less, or neutral powers. Now let's have a quick look at role and task positionings, and then later on in the presentation we are also going to have a look at power positionings. So all these roles that you see on the screen, they could be role positioning. So based on your personality, how you feel on that specific day, or based on how much you know about a specific topic, or how other people are or are not assigning you positions, you can take any of these roles. And then these are task positioning. So these are based on what the task is asking you to do. So if the task is asking you to ask questions about something, then you will be a questioner. If your task is asking you to reply or explain something, then you will be a replier or explainer. So these task and role positionings, they could really be exchangeable depending on what the task is. But how do these positions work? Is it just like you take a position and everything is going to fall into place? Not really. So there is a process to it. There is a proposed position, which is a reflexive position one wishes to take, or an interactive position one wishes to assign to another person. And then how that position is perceived by other people in that group. So how the position you wish to take or you wish to assign to someone else is perceived by other members. And then we have realized position, which is when the proposed position gets accepted by the other members in the group. And also, so there is a negotiation in that step where you propose a position and other members either accept or do not accept that position. So there is a negotiation sometimes. And the strategies you use in that negotiation is positioning strategies. Let me give you an example. Like, for example, if you in a group work, you start explaining a concept, explaining something you think other members in the group do not have a good grasp of it. And while you're explaining, another member in the group interrupts you and starts saying, but I think that's not the important thing here. So you wanted to take the position of explainer, but the other person wants to reject that position. So here is where the negotiation starts. Now, what strategies would you use to win that negotiation or steer the negotiation in the direction of your wishes? So do you ask any questions? Why don't you think this is an important issue? I think it is absolutely important. Or do you start repeating yourself? What strategies do you use to steer the negotiation in different directions is what we call positioning strategies. So in group work, in small group interactions, we have something like this. There is a proposed position. So someone starts by proposing a position for themselves or for another person in the group. And then other members in the group might perceive that position in different ways, might like it, might really reject it. And then this negotiation starts, and that negotiation needs strategies from both sides. And just like any negotiation, the person who is using the most effective strategies is going to be successful. And after this negotiation, we go to realized positioning. So whoever is able to steer the direction of that negotiation in the directions they really wish, and make sure that everyone else is on board with that and try to persuade them, then that becomes the realized positioning. So realized positioning is a position that is accepted by other group members. Now, what are the factors that influence one's interactive positioning? In interactive positioning, we said that it is a positioning that is assigned to you by somebody else, or a position that you assign to somebody else. So it is dependent on interlocutors' positioning, how other people position you and how you position other people. So the interactive positioning is going to be a big part of it, but also reflexive positioning is going to be a part of it. We're going to see an example, but before we do that, just imagine that you, in a conversation, you stay silent. So you choose a reflexive positioning of being an outsider, being someone who does not participate in the discussion. What happens? Other members in the group, they are forced to take positions instead of you. So you are basically, by choosing the position of an outsider, by choosing the position of someone who does not take part in the interaction, you are forcing other people to take part and take positions that you were supposed to take. So important to know, interlocutors positioning, interactive and reflexive positioning, both could be influential factors, and also power dynamics. And this is where it becomes very complicated. We are going to talk about power dynamics, but let's go ahead and first start an example of this interactive and reflexive positioning in interlocutors positioning. This is an example of interactive positioning, which is direct. So student A is asking a question, so student A is questioner, and student B has to reply to that question to sustain the conversation. The same happens again and again. But then in this example, we have interactive positioning, which is indirect. So this indirect interactive positioning is through self-positioning. So this is another way of assigning positions to others. It is by taking a reflexive position that requires the other person to take a position, a specific position that is required in order to sustain the conversation. So if you look at this example, we have student B playing the role of help seeker because they talk about something, they stop in the middle of the sentence, and they don't say anything else. So student A comes in and tries to fill the silence. Student B again starts, but one more time is playing the role of help seeker. And student A this time has to come in and finish the sentence as the helper. Student B takes the same role again as help seeker with not completing that task or activity, and then student A again has to come in and help. So this is how you can assign positions to others by not directly asking them to do something, but basically just by you yourself taking a position that requires someone else or your interlocutor to take a specific position. This is another example of this indirect interactive positioning through self-positioning. And this time we have one teacher and two students. So the teacher is asking the questions. Student A comes in and replies. Student B just confirms for the first time. And then student B decides to take the position of outsider. Outsider meaning not taking part in the discussion. So what happens is the teacher asks questions, student A has to come and reply. But student B is not taking any part in the discussion. So student B is taking the position of outsider, but not by not taking part in the interaction, by not replying to the teacher's questions. So although taking the position by student B is a position that he has assigned to himself and not to student A, it dictates the role of replier to student A to sustain that conversation. So student A has to come in and answer the questions that are raised by the teacher. The data from the studies we've done at UNSW on this specific topic reveal that one's positioning is very strongly related to and affected by power relations. Sturm and Antonikis define power as control over resources. And in several studies, including in our studies, power is manifested in many different ways. These include power of authority, level of language, for example, for learners, or having a good idea specifically in work-related conversations, having knowledge in a specific area. These are things that power could be manifested through them, and they give the person with these ideas or knowledge or level of language more power in comparison to other interlocutors in that group. And let's go ahead and see what that does in a group. We're going to look at power in different manifestation, different ways of manifestation, and we're going to talk about the findings. Now, our findings across different studies show that positions are associated with power. People are more likely to take certain positions when they have more power and certain positions when they have less power. When one takes a position associated with power, they will gain more and more power. And generally, the direction of interactive positioning is from more powerful to less powerful person, meaning if you are the more powerful person in an interaction, you can more easily assign positions to people with less power. These assigned positions are normally accepted by a person with less power and are seldom challenged or rejected. So if we want to look at this diagram that we talked about before. This means that when you are proposing a position, when you have more power, then other people perceive your position easier, so they don't challenge you. This negotiation doesn't need to happen, and then that becomes the realized position quicker and easier. So you don't get a lot of rejections, you don't get a lot of negotiation. And then the other important thing that we just went through was when you take positions that are associated with power, you become more powerful. When you take positions that are associated with less power, you become less powerful. And think about how that could be helpful in job-related interactions and also in educational context. And I'm going to talk about both. You remember that we had a look at task and role positionings. Now let's go ahead and look at power positionings and see how the role positions, all the positions that we had in our list, how are they related to power? So the first group in purple, these are positions that are associated with less power. So if you are an apprentice, if you play the role of help seeker or outsider, not being involved in the conversation, if you are taking the role of supporter, you are taking less power. If you are taking the positions of advisor, information elucidator, or challenger, manager, humorist, suggestion maker, critic, persuader, feedback provider, and facilitator, or helper or instructor, you are taking more positions related to more power. So if you're giving advice, as you can imagine, you are taking more power. And remember, when we take these roles associated with more power, throughout the conversation, we actually gain more power. We become more powerful in that dynamic. And then we have the third group of positions that are neutral positions. So if you're a collaborator, sympathizer, silence filler, explainer, companion seeker, questioner, or replier, these are not really associated with lower or higher powers. Now, let's go ahead and have a look at some examples, and then we can conclude with the findings, key findings, summary of the key findings, and also the implications of these. As I explained before, power could be manifested through different things. We are going to look at 3 examples of 3 different ways of power manifestation. So one is power as authority. So here, authority, we are talking about teachers, because these examples are from education setting. So students positioning with teachers are going to be different than students positioning with their peers. So if they are working with their teachers as an interlocutor, students take more limited roles. They tend to take certain positions like replier or help seeker that are generally assigned either by the teacher or by the task. So they do not show agency in choosing specific positions. They are waiting for the task or for the teacher to assign a role to them. They take longer turns, so there is less dynamic positioning going on in a student-teacher interaction. Whereas in student-student interactions, student positioning is more dynamic. It changes more frequently. There are more reflexive positioning and repositioning happening. And there are shorter turns, so the interaction is more lively and dynamic. And talking about the implications of these findings, we can understand that in a situation where we want students to perform in a very specific framework, like for example, if we are teaching them a specific context, a specific concept, and we are asking them to perform exactly by talking or using talking about or using that concept, then maybe a teacher-student interaction would be more beneficial. But if we want to make sure that we are giving students agency, if we are giving them space to practice and in a flexible environment where they can trial and error and when they can be more authentic learners, then student-student interaction is going to be more helpful. Now let's go ahead and look at an example. So this is the performance of student talking to a teacher about a task that is analyzing a movie from different perspectives, and this section is about music. So as you can see, we have the teacher playing the role of questioner and the student playing the role of replier. And as you can see, we only have 4 turns. Average length of each turn is 37 words. They are quite long. Now, for the same task, we have this interaction between students. So you have student A and B, and see how more dynamic this interaction is. We have shorter turns, and see how many different roles these students are playing. It goes from questioner to replier to silence filler to helper to humorist to also humorous helper. So a wide range of different roles. So students are actually demonstrating agency. They're trialing and error. They're really working on this task in a very flexible approach, with a very flexible approach. And this is really good when we want to give students that flexibility and making sure that they are agentic learners, they're active learners. We don't want to prescribe something for them, but rather we want them to find out the different ways they can do something. Let's look at another example of manifestation of power as an idea. So here, power is an idea. Now, as you can see here, student A and B, they are given some materials to build a bridge. And they are supposed to explain explain what they are thinking about and the different ways of building a bridge and which one is more efficient. And as you can see, student A starts by being the suggestion maker or manager, a position associated with power. And then student B follows as supporter. Then student A is explainer, again another position associated with power, and student A is also instructor. So as you can see, all positions student A is taking are positions that are associated with power. And then student B comes up with an idea. So far, student B is being the supporter, questioner, supporter. So student B is taking positions that are associated with less power, student A positions associated with more power, until turn number 12, when student B comes up with an idea of how to build a bridge. And what happens is the roles change. So student B becomes the suggestion maker. Student A from there on becomes the supporter, because everything changes, because power is manifested here as an idea. So as you can see, by proposing a new idea, you can change the direction of power. And this is very useful, both in educational or work-related or even everyday conversations. Okay, now let's look at how this conversation ends. As I said, from when student B had a suggestion, the roles change. So student B is now making suggestions, giving instructions, and student A is just supporting and following through. So this is how making a suggestion or having a new idea can change the direction of power. Here's another example, power as level of English. So this is another way of manifesting power. And as you can see here, so student B is lower in level of English compared to student A. So what happens is student A becomes the replier, and student B takes the position associated with less power, just supporting student A, just repeating, just saying yeah, or just repeating like in turn 6, yeah, to remember, just echoing and repeating what student A is saying. So student B is basically taking taking roles or positions associated with less power and trying to stay out of sight. And what happens is student A is becoming the person with more power in this conversation. Let's quickly review the key findings. The position one takes depends on several different factors. So it's not easy to predict, and it is complex. Power impacts the position one takes. It actually has a very big impact. Interactive positioning can change based on one's reflective positioning. Even if you decide not to do anything, you are basically assigning other people positions. One positions themselves differently based on the power relations with interlocutors, so you can position yourself completely differently in different groups. And that's why it is important. The findings of this study are really crucial for educators and also for organizations to know, because we have to know how we are grouping people. When grouped with people of similar power levels, we will have more dynamic positions and more interaction. So if we want, for example, brainstorming session, we'd better put people with people from similar power levels, so they feel free to share. The direction of interactive positioning is generally from more powerful to less powerful person, and people with less power positions tend to agree, support, stay neutral rather than criticize, challenge their interlocutors. This is also in line with Miller-Day's necessary convergence communication theory, which suggests that marginal people with marginal power tend to engage in convergent communication, which is defined as a pattern of uncritical acceptance of a conformity to the more powerful partner's point of view. So having these in mind, we have to make sure that we know when we are grouping people, we know the answer to these questions. Why are we grouping people? What do we want to get out of this conversation or group work? And are we putting people in groups based on their power differences and how they can best work with each other? Do we want a session or group work that is generating ideas or being more dynamic, or do we want to be very convergent? So these are questions that we need to ask ourselves before putting people in groups in any situation. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and please let me know if you have any questions.